Hi, welcome to Courageous Journeys. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to talk about something that is in the news here in the US right now. And it happens periodically whenever somebody well-known takes their own life. And I wanted to talk about it in a little bit of a different way. So in the US, over the weekend, a woman, 30 years old, took her own life. She was relatively well known. I had not heard of her before, but I don't follow that kind of thing. But in the coverage of her death, of her choosing to take her life, the conversation that has followed is similar to the kinds of conversations we hear when other well-known people take their lives, particularly people who from the outside seem like you wouldn't expect that, I suppose. So I'm talking about it today because the impact of how we hear, what it is that we hear and internalize when we are listening to these conversations, even if we're just listening to other people have them, the impact that that can have on somebody who struggles, who in some way has some resonance with that person, who other people might view as being similar in some way, and how it impacts how we feel individually, what we think and expect collectively, and the perpetuation of myths and stereotypes. Because so often people will have a recognition that something is a little off, but not really understand why. Like, I'm having kind of a bad day, but I don't know why. Or I don't know why I'm feeling this way because everything is really good. How many times have you said that to yourself? And when we've been listening to these kinds of conversations or participated in these types of conversations, the impact on us can actually be quite significant. Again, especially if you have struggled in any similar sort of ways or heard similar kinds of things that ultimately kind of leave you feeling not so great. So I want to talk about that to help you understand what might be going on, and also to begin to hopefully have conversations in a way that are beneficial to getting at some of the underlying things and not just the things that we see as being like the real issue. So, I actually don't even know how I originally heard about her death. But I heard a conversation on a news channel, a national news channel. Or actually it was a reporting. It wasn't really a conversation, but it was the reporting of her death. And I also would like to just start by saying that it is tragic. It's tragic when anybody, no matter who they are, no matter how well known they are or are not, it is tragic when somebody feels such a sense of despair and hopelessness that it feels like it's the only option. It's incredibly tragic. And for those left behind, it is truly one of the most painful experiences you can have. So, the conversation. As the reporter who started talking about it, she talked about this woman, and again, her name is Cheslie Kryst, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. She was 30 years old and took her life on Sunday, the 30th. When she first started talking about this story, she mentioned her name and said former Miss USA from 2019, so not that long ago. So she acknowledged her as former Miss USA, a TV correspondent, and I think those were the primary ways that she was described, which when you just hear that, we automatically, maybe not consciously, but again, anything that is below our consciousness can have more of an impact on us. But just in hearing her described in that way, it can do a couple of things. It creates an expectation of what that means to be that type of person or somebody who holds those titles. And for somebody who doesn't hold those titles, it creates separation. So she described her with those titles and then went on to say that she was so accomplished, that she had so much potential, that she was highly educated. And to hear those things, it really perpetuates again this idea that somebody who struggles cannot be the same person who has these accomplishments, who has this potential, that they have to be separate in some way. And I know society copes with things like this by trying to keep them separate, because then we don't have to face the reality. In our mind, collectively, if we can view the people who struggle, who are really maybe depressed or hopeless or just really struggling generally, if we can put them kind of in this little container over here and view them in a particular way, then we can just kind of go on about our lives, right? Then all the people that we interact with, that we follow on social media, and they seem so happy, we want to align with that. We want to see that and believe that that's how people exist in the world. When we have to face the reality that people struggle no matter what they look like, no matter what they've accomplished, it can cause us to have to look at ourselves and the people we care about, the people we surround ourselves with. Because if we can acknowledge that anybody struggles, well, that everybody struggles, but if we can acknowledge that anybody might be struggling at any given point, if we accept the truth that that deep sense of pain can exist for people who are successful, then we have to face a lot of things that we try really hard not to face, individually and collectively. Because we have been a society, and not just in the US, across the globe really, we are societies of people that view success, however we might think about that, as how we avoid any of those difficulties in life, which of course is not true, but it gives us something that we can kind of hold on to avoid dealing with the reality. And of course, if you've been following me for a while, you know that one of the things that I try to do in having this channel is get people to face the reality, get our society to face the reality that we all struggle, that it's not just something that people who've experienced trauma do. It's not just people who are really depressed or in a psychiatric unit. We all struggle to some degree, but we don't want to admit that. We don't want to admit it to ourselves. We don't want to admit or acknowledge our own struggle. So we lean in towards the things that help us stay in denial and avoid it. So the conversations that happen impact us in kind of a multi-layered way. Again, depending on our own experiences, our own sense of struggle generally, and on the particular day that we are hearing it. So one of the other ways, of course, that she and many other people are often described in terms of their kind of what they have going for them, therefore they should not be there, or we wouldn't expect them to be there, is comments about appearance. And obviously, as somebody who was Miss USA, obviously she's very attractive. But we, and I say this as, again, society, the way that we tend to think about things, and of course, media generally, news coverage. And I've talked about this before too, but whenever there is a news story about a woman in particular, or a female child, if that person is attractive, one of the descriptors that they generally will use is a reference to her attractiveness. So beautiful, stunning. So many times when I have watched news coverage of a child who has been murdered or missing, abused, they will often refer to her, if she's considered attractive in society standards, they will refer to her as beautiful. Pay attention the next time you hear a story like that. Again, it may not consciously register that that's happening, but we internalize that to mean something, that somehow somebody who is beautiful, that her loss or the loss of her, the devastation that she's experienced somehow is more tragic than somebody who isn't perceived as beautiful. Because on stories where a child doesn't fit the beautiful category, according to society's standards, I suppose, they don't say that. They don't use a descriptor about that person's appearance. Only when it's something that they can say is beautiful, which, I don't know, I guess you could say is good that they don't refer to the child or the person as not attractive. And of course, I'm not being serious about that, really, I guess, because in a way, I guess they could say that. But the message that it sends, that somehow that is more tragic. And I actually meant, before I did this video, to look at how many people died by suicide on January 30th, and I forgot. But far too many, for sure. But when we hear about this and it's talked about in this way, for anybody who has struggled, anybody who has thought about taking their own life, the message that we are left with, the thing that we internalize, is that if you are struggling, can you be perceived as accomplished, as having potential? Can you be perceived even of having potential if you weren't already so accomplished? And this is one of the things that I know that I can take things in a way, like I can drill down into things that sometimes can be frustrating to people. But the reason that I do that and the reason that I talk about it is because whether it's being talked about or not, it's impacting us individually and, again, collectively, because we're all internalizing these messages, right? Who we believe that we are is an internalization of the messages that we've received societally, by individuals, by the way that we're treated, by the way that we're talked about. And when I say we, it could be our gender, it could be our race, it could be our profession, whatever it is. We internalize those messages, and the less aware we are consciously, the more impact it has. So whether it is somebody really well known or somebody not known at all, other than the people in that person's immediate life. When we are hearing conversations about it, it is impacting us. And for myself, as somebody who struggled with shame around my own internal struggle with self-worth and depression and anxiety and worry and suicidality, when I would hear people talk about it, it was impacting me. It was reaffirming the shame that I felt. And to hear people talked about how much their life mattered because of how they looked or what they have achieved, how highly educated they are. What does that say? How does the person who isn't highly educated, isn't accomplished, doesn't feel like they have any potential whatsoever, what message is that sending to that person? For most people, it's going to reinforce that if that person didn't have anything to live for, didn't believe that she had anything to live for, what does that say about my life? What does that say about what's possible or not for me? And this is true whether we're talking about taking your life and being in such a desperate place that feels like it's the only option. But that also applies to how we view our own potential for healing, for being able to create a life that is something different than the struggle that we might currently, maybe throughout our lives, been living through. Well, it doesn't leave us feeling that society believes that there is much possible for us. And I know that this conversation that I'm having with you right now, how I'm talking about this, can feel a little hopeless itself, because what do we do about it? We don't have the ability to control how people around us or the media talks about things, right? And there is some level of truth to that. But the reason that I am talking to you about this today is to help you understand how things are impacting you, but also to recognize that we do actually have the ability to change how people are having those conversations. If somebody around you is talking about something, and again, no matter who it is, if somebody around you is talking about something that you might have a different perspective of or a different awareness around, participating in that conversation, bringing up something maybe that somebody hasn't thought about. Isn't her life, Cheslie's life, isn't it just as meaningful no matter whether she had been Miss USA or an attorney? Her life was just as meaningful. Certainly, if she hadn't been so beautiful, her life meant something because of who she was, not because of what she accomplished. Her life meant something to the people who loved her. And yes, more people knew her than know the average person, but that doesn't make the average person less valuable. And whether you are well known and have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers on social media, everybody's life matters. And we need to have conversations that help us understand that on a felt level. Not just a conscious, cognitive level that, yes, of course, everybody's life matters. But we need to be able to internalize that truth. And when the conversations are such that some people somehow matter more, and again, I'm not suggesting that people are doing this intentionally or anything like that, but that's the message that is received. And again, it continues to perpetuate the stereotypes and myths about what it means to struggle, what it looks like to struggle. That somebody who we perceive in all these ways can't be a person who will think about taking their own life. Not only does that perpetuate the myths, it also then perpetuates the stereotypes, but also the shame. And when we feel shame about something, we're less likely to talk about it. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that we won't talk about it. So in changing first of all, in changing our own awareness of how things are affecting us, then we can begin to have different conversations with the people around us. We can even begin to have different conversations in our own head. If you are somebody who has followed a celebrity's suicide, and what I mean by that is like listened to the conversations, listened to the coverage, seen things on social media, followed what people were saying about it, thinking about what did that leave you with? How did that leave you feeling? What did it leave you believing about yourself? What conversation were you having with yourself in your own mind? Even becoming aware of that can help begin to shift things. Because when you are aware of how you are affected by that, what it is that it's creating for you, then of course it's in your awareness. And when it's in your awareness, you can begin to speak differently about it. You can begin to think differently about it. And I also want to say this. If you are somebody who is struggling or has struggled with thinking about taking your life, feeling so desperate for the pain, the anxiety, the feelings to end, you are not alone. And we look always. Our accomplishments do not have any bearing on how we feel internally, or our seemingly lack of accomplishments. We can take that as evidence that we are unworthy, but our accomplishments do not define our worthiness. Our potential does not define our worthiness. Other people's perception of our potential based on some external idea has no bearing on our worthiness or what is possible for ourselves and our lives. I never would have imagined that I could feel the way that I do in my life. The possibility didn't even cross my mind. And there were many times that I thought about taking my life. There were way too many nights to count that I went to bed, even as a child, wishing that I wouldn't wake up. And at the time, for the most part, I kind of looked the part. People wouldn't have looked at me and thought, wow, she's so successful and got her life together. They wouldn't have thought that. Well, I don't think they would have thought that, because there was nothing external that made it appear that way. So whenever I heard stories, whenever I saw in the media about somebody being referred to in a certain way that was kind of good in society standards, it created more separation for me and what I believed about myself and how I belonged in this space. So be aware as you hear these conversations. Be aware of what you're saying to yourself. What ideas, what beliefs is it reinforcing for you? And know that you're not alone. Know that struggle looks a lot of different ways. That what it looks like on the outside has no bearing on what is happening on the inside. Again, we're more shocked by it, surprised by it. The conversations happen because people want to believe that if you can just be successful or look a certain way, then it somehow fixes everything. There is no shame in struggle. And the more that we can, as a society, stop using avoidance and denial as a way of dealing with it, of not having to face our own struggle or fear of somebody that we love struggling, the more we feel safe in being able to talk about it. And the safer we feel in being able to talk about it, the less shame there is, and the more we talk about it. And if we all felt like we could talk about it and didn't feel the pressure to be a certain way, to look a certain way, aesthetically or in terms of our success, so-called success, then we would feel more ease around being honest with ourselves and with others. So please be honest with yourself. It has to start there. If you're struggling, it's okay that you're struggling. You don't have to struggle alone. Recognizing that even when it doesn't appear that somebody around you might be struggling, they have. Maybe they are right now. Let yourself really lean into that truth and know that you are not alone. You can talk about it. It is important to think about who you're talking about it with, because you don't want to share it with somebody who will shut you down or say, "What? You've got so much going for you." That is one of the worst things you can hear in those moments. And that is one of the reasons that some people don't talk about it. People who, again, are successful, right? Or beautiful, wealthy, have lots of friends. We have to be mindful about how we talk about it. And even our own individual ideas that, well, if I could just achieve this, then I'd be happy and I wouldn't struggle anymore. If I could just look this way. And what happens so often is we achieve that, or we look this way, we lose the weight, we get the degree, we have the wealth, whatever it is, and you realize that the struggle doesn't go away. In fact, it can feel even bigger because you're not supposed to feel that way anymore. We have to be able to change the conversation. And it starts with the conversation within ourselves. How we talk to ourselves. Thank you for watching. If there is somebody who you think might benefit from hearing that they're not alone, that doesn't matter what your life looks like, what you look like, no matter where you fall on that spectrum in any way, it is normal to struggle. It doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It doesn't mean that you're weak. We all struggle. All of us, no matter what somebody might say, we all struggle at times. And sometimes the struggle is so profound that it feels like we can never find our way out. And sometimes it's just feeling like there's something not quite right, but you're not sure what it is. But you're able to still function in the way that you always do. Both of those are examples of struggle. And the more you're kind of struggling, but you don't know what it is that's creating that struggle, the more likely you are to get to that place where things begin to feel hopeless. So join me in having this conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions. Leave them in the comments below. And again, if you think that somebody could benefit, please consider sharing this with them. And if you found it helpful, give it a thumbs up so that other people who are searching on YouTube might find this as well. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this community. And know that no matter what you're struggling with, you are not alone.